Today I want to share the story of how I won a small fight with a company that Canadians hate, and that's UPS. Now, Americans might be watching this and thinking, why would you hate UPS? They're just a shipping company. So here's the problem. When somebody sends something to a Canadian from the US via UPS, first they pay UPS on their end, right? They pay for that to get delivered. But UPS won't necessarily actually deliver it until they get a second payment, which they extract from the Canadian recipient. And the second payment is ostensibly for customs clearance. The problem is that the fees they charge for this are way higher than anyone else, and what they typically do is they hold your package hostage until you actually pay them. So what'll happen is they'll show up at your door, package in hand, the package that was already paid to be delivered, and they'll say, oh, you have a bunch of fees. You have to pay those before you can have this package. And of course, those fees are way higher than anyone else charges. I'll give an example a little later on. What this means is that they can basically then get this second payment, which often exceeds the initial shipping cost, sometimes more than double the initial shipping cost. So they seem to love this, but Canadians really hate them. Personally, if I'm trying to order something and I see that the shipping option is UPS, I'll cancel the order. I don't want UPS sending me things because they're going to engage in this sort of thing. But I went and I ordered something and they said, hey, we're going to ship it to you. But they didn't say which shipping company they'd be using. And it turned out to be UPS. Now, in this case, they just brought the item, which was a hot sauce packet, a collection of hot sauces, and they just left it on my porch. Cool, no problem with that. That's kind of what shippers do. So I take that in, everything's great, right? Well, not so much. What they do then is they send me a bill, and this bill says that they want a whole bunch of money from me. And the total is $42.60. Now, some of that is legitimate. Now, you might be thinking, Runkle, why are you fighting them over $42.60? Well, because they do this to everybody, and the hope was to try to prevent them from doing this to anybody. They kind of defeated that, and I'll talk about that as we go. But some of this is legitimate. The Canadian government charged $6.79 for this to come across the border. That's taxes. Okay. But in order to handle this $6.79, there's a bunch of other fees. They say, okay, we're going to have GST on the GST, because that $6.79 is taxes, and they're saying, well, we're going to charge additional GST. They have an entry prep fee of $30.40. Okay, they have a disbursement fee of $7.40. So a fee for them paying out the $6.79 in advance. And you'll note that the fee for paying out the $6.79 ahead of time is more than the $6.79. Yeah, so they basically add a whole bunch of costs here, and these costs are more than the actual price they charged the initial shipper to send me the stuff, or at least more than the shipper charged me. Okay, so I was not super happy about this. I get this bill and they say, hey, if you don't pay this, it notes that this is subject to a late payment fee of 7% of the total charges outstanding. And basically they're saying, hey, we'll take you to collections if you don't pay this. Now, I've got a problem with this because I never made any agreement with UPS. I didn't know that UPS was going to be the shipper, and had I known, I would not have purchased this. They have an agreement with the shipper. Like, they made a deal with the shipper to send me the thing. We don't have any agreement that should allow them to make these charges. So I sent them an email to sort of raise some concerns, and I also cite some law. So let's have a look at this email here. We'll just go over what I sent them. So it says, hello, I'm writing because I've received this invoice from you, which I find curious because we have no contractual relationship that would allow you to bill me. Any contract you have is with the shipper, not with me. However, that is not the only reason why I will not be paying this invoice. Please refer to the Consumer Protection Act. And then I give the, this is the citation for the Consumer Protection Act, the RSA 2000 C 26.3. Now, this is something that is specific to Alberta, but you may have similar laws in whatever area you are. It is worth knowing the consumer protection laws in your area because they can potentially give you all sorts of power if you are in a transaction that is abusive in some fashion, which this one is. So I note I am an Alberta resident, therefore it applies here. Specifically, Section 5A of the Act notes that the Act applies to an unfair practice in which the supplier or consumer is a resident of Alberta. So first I'm saying the Consumer Protection Act covers me. All right. I then note your billing practices are unfair under the following sections. Now you might think unfair is just, sort of whiny language. Like, why are you just whining at them about unfairness? Well, unfair is actually a term within the Consumer Protection Act. This is a legal term of jargon. So you'll see this is from the Consumer Protection Act. It says unfair practices. And it is an offense for a supplier to engage in an unfair practice. So basically, I am not just saying, hey, this is, I'm complaining, I'm whining. I'm actually saying that they are breaking the law. That's the point here. So, first, to exert undue pressure or influence on the consumer to enter into the consumer transaction. And the reason why I note this is because, and I go on to say, this applies because you frequently hold shipped goods hostage in order to force a consumer to agree after the fact to your services. So normally what happens is somebody's paid for this to be delivered to you, but they say, we're going to hold on to this and you can't have it until you pay our fees, which gets a lot of people to pay the fees, right? Now, in my case, that was not what happened. In my case, what they did is they just dropped it off, and so they didn't even give me the opportunity to choose to engage in customs clearance myself. They just said, hey, here you go, here's the package. This is not their usual thing. I suspect that a driver screwed up, but that's not on me. But the other one I note here is to charge a price for goods or services that grossly exceeds the price at which similar goods or services are readily available without informing the consumer of the difference in price and the reason for the difference. And I note, on information and belief, UPS charges rates for brokerage that vastly exceed those of competitors, such as Purolator, Federal Express, and others. To put this into perspective, about the same time as this, I got another package and with a similar value, right? A similar amount of GST was owing, and the total for the other package was about $10 owing, being about, $7 government taxes that the government is hammering me as a Canadian with. Okay, fine. I can't really, fighting the government's a whole different adventure on that one. And then about $3 for the charge of handling all of this. Okay, that's reasonable. Instead, UPS charges $40, so there's a little bit of a difference. Now, you might think, well, Runkle, you're probably not doing too badly, and it's $30, or what's the big deal? The big deal is that they do this millions of times to tons and tons of Canadians, and this adds up to huge money. UPS appears to basically be robbing Canada, and I don't appreciate it. So, while I can't really pursue this in a larger sense because UPS caved, I am making this video so that you might find it useful. All right. Now I go on to note, I would invoke the cancellation of agreement provisions in Section 7 of the Act, except we have no agreement. What am I talking about here? Well, the law here, in terms of the Consumer Protection Act, it details a whole ton of unfair practices. So they say it's an unfair practice for a supplier in a consumer transaction or a proposed consumer transaction. I noted the to exert undue pressure, but there's all sorts of other things that constitute unfair practices. To use exaggeration, innuendo, or ambiguity as to a material fact with respect to a consumer transaction. To charge a price for goods or services that is more than 10% to a maximum of $100 higher than the estimate given for those goods or services, unless the consumer has expressly consented to the higher price before the goods or services are supplied, or if the consumer requires additional or different goods or services, the consumer and the supplier agree to amend the estimate in a consumer agreement. So, as an example here, let's say I take my car to the mechanic and I say, I need an oil change. And the mechanic says, okay, that'll be $300. And they give me an estimate. Cool. Now I'm already being wildly overcharged, but I'm just picking numbers out of the air. I'm not trying to pick reasonable numbers here. So the mechanic later comes back after I go in and they say, yeah, we actually charged you $3,000. That would be an unfair practice. Unless they call me and say, hey, it's going to be $3,000. And for some reason I go, yeah, okay, that's reasonable. Sure. That would be dumb on my part, but that would be allowed by the law. Or the second thing is if they require additional or different goods or services. So let's say I go in and I just want an oil change and they say, hey, your engine is done. You need a new engine and it's going to cost you a whole bunch more. And then I agree to get that additional work done. So all of these are different, sort of rules and practices and so forth. And you can see there's a lot of them. But Section 7 gives this a bit of teeth. It notes a consumer may cancel at no cost or penalty to the consumer a consumer transaction, whether written or oral, that was entered into by the consumer and a supplier who engaged in an unfair practice regarding the consumer transaction, whether the unfair practice occurred before, during, or after the time when the consumer transaction was entered into. And in addition, the consumer is entitled to any remedy that is available at law, including damages. So basically, if they engage in an unfair practice, you can cancel the deal. And you can also potentially get damages for it. This is really important because sometimes these unfair practices can include things, various sorts of ways that they try to snag you into an awful deal. The problem with this is that it says you can cancel the deal, but we never actually had a deal. I didn't hire UPS. The supplier did. The shipper did. So I don't really have an agreement with UPS. Now, there is some case law to the effect of agency. Now, I think that case law is wrongly decided. I'm not going to go through that case. I'm just going to tell you it's here so that this video doesn't end up being 62 hours. But I continue on. I say, I have never and do not agree to pay you. However, in the alternative, I am formally providing notice under Section 7. So in the arguments in the alternative is in law. Sometimes you can argue, here's the thing, like I think it's this. But if I'm wrong, then we're doing this instead. So here I'm saying, if I'm wrong and we do have an agreement, I am formally providing notice under Section 7 of cancellation to the consumer transaction for an unfair practice at no cost or penalty to the consumer. The date of this transaction, per your invoice, and I put transaction in scare quotes because I don't think there really was one, is October 11th, 2024, and the location is Edmonton, Alberta. Why do I put that in? Well, because the law actually requires this to be a valid notice. So I then go on to say, I'm willing to repay you the actual amount that you've paid in customs GST, which appears to be the amount of $6.79. This is not an acceptance of liability. This is an offer of settlement. So I don't owe you. You chose to pay that on your own, but I think it's fair that they're not actually out of pocket. I don't think it's fair that they grift on me, but the government charged the $6.79. I'm not trying to rip UPS off either. I just don't want to get dinged with this unfair charge. So then I go on with the legal threat. And that is, in the alternative, I will be proceeding with an action under Section 13 of the Consumer Protection Act. We're going to talk about this one. This one's fun. I will be seeking the following. 1. A declaration that this practice is unfair, pursuant to Section 13(2)(a). 2, an order for rescission of the consumer transaction under 13.2D3. A rescission is just canceling it, right? Cancel the deal. 3, this is the fun part. This is the really fun part. An injunction restraining the supplier from engaging in the unfair practice under section 13.2E. Now, this is the part I'm kind of disappointed with, because I would have liked to fight them in court over this one, because if they get the injunction, if I'd been able to get that, then I would have been able to bar them from engaging in this practice throughout Alberta, which would have cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, you can guess why they fold on this one, because this is something they probably don't want to have heard in court. And 4, costs pursuant to section 13 sub 4. But you might be saying, Runkle, you're a lawyer, you can do this kind of stuff for fun. But what about the ordinary person? And this is where the law gets even more interesting, because there's a provision that allows for what I tell them in the letter here. I note that such an action may be taken over by the director, in which case the director would be covering all costs of litigation. What does that mean? There's a provision that allows the government to step in and say, nope, we're taking over this action. You might say, wait, the government is taking away your legal action? Sure. But it also means that the government's lawyers are doing it and they're paying for it, not you. Which means that this is a provision that can very much, assuming if the director, and it's at their discretion, they don't have to, but if the director wants to step in and take over, it allows for, for people who might have been wronged to pursue on the government's dime instead of on their own. That can be a huge deal. But I also continue on. Additionally, I note that your conduct in this matter also constitutes a negative option practice pursuant to section 20. And then we go on to cover the definition, as it provides goods or services to a consumer, including the enhancement of a service that a consumer is already receiving that the consumer did not request, and requires the consumer to pay for the goods or services unless the consumer informs the supplier that the consumer does not want the goods or services. What is negative option practices? Well, one of the things that used to happen is that you get companies that might send you an item, right? They send you, I don't know, they send you like a box of dice or something. And you go, oh, cool, that arrived. And then they send you a bill afterwards that says, hey, did you enjoy that box of dice? That's going to be $60. You go, wait a minute. Now, it's one thing if it's a box of dice, which you probably still have unless you threw it in the garbage, but they might do it with things like a bottle of wine or something like that, where you might actually consume the item. And then you're like, wait. And they might keep sending you things to say, you have to tell us no for each item and send it back at your own expense. The law shut that practice down pretty firmly. But another example of negative option practices would be, let's say I decide to start up a snow shoveling business. It's Canada. There's lots of snow to shovel. And I have the clever idea that I go to every house on my block and I say, listen, unless you say otherwise, I will shovel the snow off your walk and you will owe me $30 for each time I do it. I can't do that. That's not legal, because I can't say you will get your walk shoveled unless, and you'll owe me for that. Instead, what I'd have to do is post flyers that say, hey, I'm willing to shovel your walk for $30, and they would have to actively opt in. So, yeah. Why do I think that this is a negative option practice? Well, they've already been paid to deliver the item, and then they say, we're going to do this additional thing that we have decided for some reason is not included in the charge we charge the shipper, unless you tell us not to. So we're going to do it for you first, and then you have to tell us to undo it in order to avoid those charges. Yeah. So the Consumer Protection Act, as I note in this letter, it says, I note Section 22 of the Consumer Protection Act indicates a consumer is not liable to pay for any goods or services received under a negative option practice. I then say, please confirm immediately whether you are accepting my offer for settlement or alternatively waiving your fees entirely. In the alternative, I'll be filing in the Alberta Court of King's Bench. Please confirm your preferred address for service of court documents. And you might be thinking, okay, so you sent them that email and they folded, and that is not correct. That is not what happened. Instead, they sent me this. Hi, Ian. Thank you for your detailed email regarding the invoice. I appreciate your concerns and would like to clarify a few points. By shipping with UPS, consumers are assumed to be aware of our rate guide. How the heck would I be aware of their rate guide when I didn't even know that it was from UPS? And how, this makes no sense. This is gobbledygook, but okay. Which is available on our website. Different couriers have varying charges based on their services, and we recognize that our brokerage fees may differ from those of our competitors. However, Alberta law actually says that you can't charge a much higher fee for your services unless you explain and provide warning and notice of that. UPS automatically handles customs clearance for several reasons. Most individuals do not have their own customs broker. Many commercial customs brokers do not handle personal shipments. Individuals often cannot be reached during the day for clearance information, and our automatic clearance process helps expedite delivery. Cool. The problem comes in when they want to charge fees for it. That's where they run into legal issues on that. They say, I sincerely apologize for the frustration and disappointment you've experienced regarding the brokerage fee for your package. I completely understand your concerns and would like to provide a clear explanation. The problem wasn't that it wasn't clear. It wasn't that I needed an explanation. The package was shipped via ground, and the brokerage charges included an entry preparation fee, which contributes to the overall cost. I still don't know what their entry preparation fee is, but okay. Here's the breakdown of the fees. So, entry preparation fee, $30.40. Disbursement fee, $3.70. That's not actually what it says on my summary of fees. My summary of fees says that they charged me $7.40. Brokerage GST, $1.71. So they say, for detailed information about brokerage charges, please refer to pages 115 to 117 of the following link. So they assume that everyone who's getting shipped a package has read at least 117 pages of their nonsense? Come on. I understand that this situation is frustrating, but unfortunately, we are unable to waive the brokerage fees as they are standard charges for customs clearance, which are only several times what their competitors are charging. Thank you for your understanding, and if you have any further questions or need assistance, please feel free to reach out. Okay, so clearly that was not a satisfying answer, and then we have a little bit of a back and forth. We have a little bit of an exchange. And so, yeah, we can cover that. It's fairly quick. We'll just, so I say, hi, I didn't ship with UPS. Someone else shipped something to me with UPS, and I was not even aware of what carrier they would be using. You have a contract with them. And yes, I do have a further question. What is your preferred address for service of the court documents? So their response is, hi, Ian. Thank you for your reply, and I apologize for any confusion regarding the shipment and associated charges. I understand your frustration, especially since you were not aware of the carrier being used. It is generally the shipper's responsibility to inform the recipient of any expected charges for international shipments. So, yeah, they told me what they were going to charge me for shipping, but yeah. So they say, regrettably, we're unable to waive the brokerage fees as they're standard charges for customs clearance, as previously explained. I recommend communicating directly with the shipper to discuss any arrangements regarding these charges. It's not the shipper's fault. I ordered from the Hot Ones, like a Hot Ones challenge box. It's not their problem. This is a UPS problem. Thank you for your understanding, and if you have any further questions or need assistance, please feel free to reach out. So my response is, what is your address for service of legal documents in Alberta? I would be able to find this myself, but it's easier if they just tell me an address for service. And then they come back with a new answer. Hi, Ian. Good day! Exclamation mark. Okay. I'm now handling your case to assist further with your request. I sincerely apologize for any inconvenience this may have caused. I agree that you should have been notified about these charges before being billed or invoiced. The reason UPS handled the brokerage is that the shipment was addressed to a residential location, and typically, individuals are not available during the day to provide clearance information. I will note that they actually delivered this into to me. I was home. To avoid delays, UPS automatically clears such shipments. That sounds like a you problem. I appreciate your proposed settlement. Unfortunately, we cannot waive the GST-HST tax as UPS has already paid it to CBSA, that's the Canadian Border Services Agency, in advance. I will adjust your brokerage fees by $35.81. You can pay the remaining GST-HST tax of $6.79 to our brokerage department via phone, as we cannot process it over the phone due to security and privacy policies. What? So, I appreciate your proposed settlement, which was that I pay them $6.79. Unfortunately, we can't do your proposed settlement. So, how about you just pay the remaining $6.79? Okay, that was in fact my proposed settlement. So, it sounds like we are doing my proposed settlement. And they say you can pay the remaining $6.79 via phone, but we can't process it over the phone during. So this was a little bit confusing. At any rate, I did pay it over the phone. We're squared up. UPS and I are all squared. So, what's the moral of this story? Well, the moral of this story is that I was able to use the Consumer Protection Act to get them to back down and walk away from those charges. And possibly you might be able to too. You'll have to go and, you'll have to look into that for yourself or contact legal counsel, which I know sucks. I'm telling you the story of my thing. I'm not trying to give you any legal advice here. However, I am somewhat disappointed in this outcome, and the reason why is I was all geared up to actually fight them over this. I was like, yes, let's go to war. And that was because it would have been pretty awesome to get a decision to say, you guys have to knock this off. I would have loved to be able to have that larger impact for, Albertans generally, and because there's also other provisions. It might have helped Canadians generally in that there's other places with other similar consumer protection rules. So that would have been what I would have preferred, is to fight them. Hopefully with the director taking over, and then it's at the government expense. Because really, come on, getting the government to fight a big corporation on your behalf, that's kind of living the dream, right? You're like, this is the whole let them fight meme in person. But because the Consumer Protection Act does require me, there is a provision that requires me to make reasonable efforts to settle things and to square things up with the shipper, I couldn't just immediately file the case. I had to actually engage in that email transaction with them. And then they folded. So, yeah. But I'm sure this is not going to be the last time somebody sends me something with UPS, even when they say they didn't. There have been times where I've ordered something to be shipped, and the shipper says it's coming via United States Postal Service. And then it comes via UPS, and UPS goes, we want all the money. UPS's fees, by the way, sometimes greatly exceed the value of the thing that has been sent. They can be higher than the actual shipping costs. They can be just, you never really know what you're going to get. So if you're an American who does business and ships things to Canada, please stop using UPS. everyone in Canada will thank you. And if you're UPS, please either go out of business or change your practices, because we here in Canada hate you and hope for bad things for you because we hate you. I think I said that, but it bears saying twice. You really suck. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. This is kind of a fun little digression into Canadian law. But the moral of the story, check your local consumer protection laws because they can be a huge help. Sometimes, I've been contacted by people, and this is not my area of law, so I typically am able to say, you need to read the Consumer Protection Act and then either hire someone else or do it yourself. But you get people who, for instance, agree to a timeshare or something like that. And there's provisions in there for that might help you a lot if you've been sort of bullied into a transaction that you don't agree with. Now, that doesn't mean that they give you carte blanche to back out of any transaction. There's a whole lot of rules and conditions and all of that, but that's why it's a long thing. I'm going to link the Consumer Protection Act below, and you can check that out for yourself. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I want to thank my Patreon supporters at the $50 level, Bottle Shock and Oz, Canada's National Farms Association, PJs Forever, CMP, Cielo, Purple Dragonair. Thank you as well to the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Thank you to the $20 supporters, and sorry, I'm just a little out of sorts here. It's been a bit. Mark, Lindsay Metcalf, Larry Kalniak, Kyle Fox, Drunkle of the Baileys, Cameron Johnson, Andrew Elsich, Marvin CZ, and Dorky Dane. Thank you as well to my $10 supporters, who will be in the crawl immediately following. Thank you for watching. Hope this has armed you with knowledge. See you next time.